Hello there, everybody. Today, I am going to be talking to you about books in translation. So we're going to talk about what it's like to be translated, what the process is like, how it's different depending on what kind of author you are. I'm going to show you some of the different styles of book and translation that I get. I'm going to take any questions that you have about being translated, what the translation process is like. I have a ton of questions to start off because a lot of people ask questions ahead of time. And then, as always, if we have time, I can do some extra questions at the end as well about anything you want to ask me about. But today, I'm trying to theme the live, so we're going to see how that goes, and we're going to be talking about translations. I am at my office on a weekend and it turns out there's construction going on, so I apologize if you hear any music or loud noises in the background. They seem to be having a really good time renovating the office, so that's nice, but it might percolate. Hopefully it doesn't. I hope you all can hear me. I asked about this already in the Parasol group, but I'd love to know, I always love to know if you're tuning in from another place and where you're tuning in from. I love the global reach on video. It makes me really happy. But I'd also love to know if you read me in another language, or if your first experience with one of my books was in another language, or if you have read one of my books in translation, or anyone else's books really as a translated work, if you have more than one language and what that experience is like. So yeah, please let me know. That's very interesting to me. So let's get started with a look at some foreign books and then I will talk about it. So Solus is my first book, and this is a traditionally published book, and this is what it looked like in its very first form. It came out in mass market, and this is what the cover art looked like. So here are some examples of books of Solus in other languages. So here it is in Portuguese, and this, Valentia, is a Portugal-based publisher. So if you are published into Portuguese, it's either out of Portugal or out of Brazil. So my Portuguese translations for the finishing school books are actually from a Brazilian publishing house. So that's one nuanced difference in languages. Here is what the Polish translation looked like. So you can see that they're kind of, well, this isn't Polish. This versatile. So this is my Spanish edition. Anyway, you can see they're sort of different in like how they stylize the font, how big the book is, what kind of book it is. So this is a paperback, but it has a like flap doodle on it. So yeah, so different publishers, different styles. And then the finishing school books, for example, got a pocket edition when they were published to France. And so it's this little tiny edition. These books were published first in hardcover in the United States. And so that brings us to something that I will address, which is some languages pick up my adult stuff, but not my young adult stuff, and vice versa. So it has to do, what people pick up to publish in other countries also has to do with what's popular in those countries if you write in multiple different genres. So this is my Slovak edition, I think, and so it has a case, it's called a case wrap when it's a hardcover, but the image is printed directly on the cover. So this is the second finishing school book. And then my mangas also got other editions in other languages. So this is the French version of the Solus manga, and this is the German version of the Solus manga. So there's a lot of different versions of different languages. Now those books I just showed you all had the same cover art. That's not always the case. So when my books go to Japan, and here's what a Japanese translation looks like, tiny little thing, they give it a different cover art. They give it an illustrated cover when it goes to the Japanese market. This is Heartless, where she dresses up as the maid. This is Etiquette and Espionage, in the Japanese edition. And you can see, even though the first one I showed you, this one is an adult book, or a book for the trade adult audience. This is a young adult book, but it's the same edition. So these ones match, my Japanese editions all match each other, regardless of which series it is. And then here's the infamous German cover. So when the German covers first came out, all cards on the table, didn't really like the German artwork, but I've kind of grown accustomed to it. And then finally, my most recent edition is the Russian illustrated version. So I showed an unboxing of this one recently, and you can see that for the Russian market, they went with an illustrated cover instead, rather than a photo manipulated cover. So those are kinds of examples of cover art and the fact that it's different. And I will go into why that might be the case as well. But first, I'm gonna just like do some of the basics. I have notes. So I did a calculation because somebody did ask me about this. I am in 15 different languages across 2 series. So far, only my traditionally published books have been translated into other languages, and so that is my first series, which is the Parasol Protectorate series, which is adult steampunk, and then my second series, which is the Finishing School series, which is young adult steampunk, and spies, and then my third series, which is a spin-off from the first one. So it's another adult series. So those have, in some form or another, mostly been translated in some places and another, for a total of 15 different languages. Now, I don't make a distinction between territories. So if you include like publications to places like Canada and the UK, where I did have to oversell the book, so sell the book over to a new publishing house in order to be produced there, Australia, New Zealand, places like that, then I have more, but those aren't translations into a different language. Sometimes they are anglicized, where the spelling and stuff is changed for the UK, Australian, and Kiwi kind of marketplace, but I don't consider those translations because they don't have a translator going in and actually having another person having to reinterpret the words that I have written. So I'm in 15 different languages, but way more territories than that, if that makes sense. But the other territories are just different versions of the English language position. Yes, so Charity, if you want to ask questions, you can put a question mark in it, but I'm kind of just going to talk for the first 10, 15 minutes or so to talk about I think I can anticipate some questions that people have, and then I'll probably ask again for questions after that. So those are the 15 languages. The 15 languages are Portuguese, Danish, French, German, Hungarian, Italian, Japanese, Polish, Spanish, Swedish, Taiwanese, Thai, Turkish, Russian, Czech, Slovak, Croatian, and I'm probably forgetting somebody in there, I think. But those are the languages that I am in. So mostly European languages. You'll notice there's some heavy-hitting languages that I don't mention that are spoken by many, many people, including Chinese or Mandarin. It's not on that list, and boy, are we going to talk about that. But so those are my languages in general. Right, first thing. The second thing that I think readers don't realize is there are 3 basic ways to get translated as an author, a fiction author in particular. There are 2 traditional ways to be translated and 1 indie, and I'm talking in very broad brushstrokes. So there are other ways and like nuanced ways. I know some authors who will like crowdsource translation and stuff like that, but essentially when most authors talk about being translated, there are 3 ways to be translated. The first way is when you have sold your world rights to your traditional publisher. Out of the United States, that's usually your US publisher. Sometimes it's your British publisher. If you sell world rights, that means the publisher, your English language publisher, has the rights to produce the English language to the world. So the English language edition can be produced to the world, but also they can sell out or sell over your translation rights. So they basically act like your middleman. So the publisher then can subcontract with, say, a German publisher to get your book translated into German, or sometimes in the case of these very large publishing houses like Hachette, which from its name you should know it's not originally an American company at all, they have subsidiary publishers already that they will in-house sell the rights to. So you can be published by Hachette, by a subsidiary company in all of these different language territories. And sometimes they'll do that, and sometimes they'll sell out to other publishers in other territories. Sometimes they don't cover all of the territories. So world rights can be good because the publisher has to pay you your advance. So they're kind of motivated to generate as many new sales as possible, and that includes language sales to translation in other countries. But it can be bad because there's sort of in-house dealings, and after your book has sort of faded from the zeitgeist and isn't really interesting to people anymore, they're not really motivated to try and like resell your book anymore. If you've earned out and you're doing well, they kind of aren't that interested. Also, a lot of times publishers in other countries, and smaller countries in particular, are more shaky than the bigger publishers, and so they can go under or go bankrupt, at which point your book is an asset. And if, as in an asset that's being contested as part of bankruptcy procedures, and then the bigger publisher is kind of not really motivated to try and find a new publisher or anything like that. So that is the first way you get translations rights. The second way you get translations rights is if you, the author, retain your world distribution rights. That means you sell to your US or UK publisher just English language rights, which means they have the rights to the English language territories, but not to translation. You retain the rights in translation. And then you usually get a foreign agent who specifically is in charge of reselling your translation rights to other countries and to other publishers of other countries. A lot of those deals take place or took place at the Frankfurt Book Fair. But a foreign language agent usually has a whole cornucopia of different publishers that they deal with. So in my case, my first series, I sold the world rights, and my second series, my young adult series, I retained the world rights and have a foreign agent who resells those. So I have experience with both those that style of foreign translation. The third way you get a foreign translation is if you are a hybrid or a self-publisher and you retain all of the rights to your books yourself, and then you can go out and contract and hire a translator yourself, and then it's all a self-published side of the equation. You work with that person to get your books translated, then you have the translated manuscript, you pay your translator, either work for hire or a royalty share, and then you publish the book yourself. So basically, now like I said, there are other ways, but those are the three main ones. Now, I have never done the third one, and I can talk about why I've chosen not to put some of my self-published books into translation in a bit. We'll come to that. All right, so here are some of the questions that I got early on from everyone about foreign language translations. So the first question I get a lot is, have I ever been able to read a translation of my own books in another language? The answer to that is no. The only language I have even passing comfort levels with is Spanish. And it has been a really long time since I had classroom Spanish and had to consistently read in Spanish. So yeah, my Spanish is not good. I understand it pretty well. I did live in Peru for a while and a couple of other places, but I don't speak it great. My vocabulary retention is pants. So yeah, so no, I've never read any of my books in translation. I also don't listen to my books as audio, read by other people. I don't like to hear I'm weird because I'm really not precious about my stuff, and I don't mind another person's interpretation of my books. So like I like the illustrated editions, the manga editions of my stuff. I'm like, oh, that's fun. It's fun to see someone else interpret it. But I really don't like listening to people read my stuff back to me, because all I can hear are the flaws and the mistakes, and it drives me nuts. So so I imagine I would have a similar issue reading in translation, but no, I never have been able to. I'm not fluent in a second language. So then the next question is, if I could read one of the languages, which one would I choose to read? And the answer to that is I would be really interested in languages that are extremely different from my own, like from the Indo-European stock. So I'd be really, really interested to read the Thai version. Obviously I couldn't. It's not a Latin script. Or the Japanese version. I'm interested in linguistics and culture, and how the language affects cultural reinterpretation, and how and humor and things like that. So I think I would find those translations really, really interesting. I feel like German, French, Spanish, Portuguese are all probably pretty similar, and I feel like most of the humor at least probably translates. The wordplay, of course, is more complicated. But I would be very interested to see how it is in some of the Asian languages, or even something like Russian. But of course I can't. So the next question is, how does the process of choosing a translator go, or choosing what language to be translated in? So the first thing is, a traditionally published author mostly does not have a choice. Like, we don't go out and be like, I would love to be translated into X language. That's not the way the power dynamic works. The power dynamic is your foreign agent or your publisher comes to you and says, guess what? You're going to be translated into this language, and you say, yay, how exciting. I'm delighted to be translated into another language. So not only do I never have any contact with choosing a translator, most of the time I don't have any contact with the translator, and most of the time I don't have any contact with my publisher in that country at all. I get very excited if any of them reach out to me. My Portuguese publisher is one of the few that I still have a great relationship with. We're in contact over Instagram and places like that, and they regularly relate to me, or try to. I've done like sort of videos for them and stuff. I had early contact with some of my publishers after Solus came out, but some of them went under, some of them no longer publish my books, so I'm kind of out of contact with all of them. And I have two translators who I have talked to regularly, and those are my Japanese translator, who again, I'm no longer translated into Japanese, so I don't really have contact with them anymore, and my French translator. So those are the only two translators I've ever had any emails back and forth about anything. So despite the fact that I'm in 15 different languages, two translators have reached out to talk to me about translation, and I would say I've had an email or two back and forth with maybe six, maybe half a dozen of the actual what we would call our foreign publishing houses. So yeah, a lot less contact than you would think. Sorry, that's just the way, in my experience, that's the way it is. Somebody asked me what's the most surprising language that my books have ever been translated into. Russian was the biggest surprise for me. So Solus sold Russian rights over 10 years ago, but then nobody actually published the book. That happens all the time. It's kind of like a film option. Sometimes a foreign translator will pay for the rights and then just never actually do the translation. I wonder if that's happened with my Thai edition, because I've never seen that version. That's the other thing, is I don't always, although I showed you a bunch of foreign editions, I don't always get to see them or even know when they come out. Generally speaking, I know when one of my books has released in a foreign country because somebody from that country contacts me and tells me, or sends me a picture. Like, that's how I know it's come out. and I get very excited about it. So some sort of disappeared into the ether. The Russian translation did, and so eventually the rights returned to me. And then 10 years later, this publisher contacted me to do the Russian edition. And so that I think this is the most surprising language that I've ever been in, was that 10 years after the book Solace was a big deal, somebody still wanted to publish it in another language. That's really unusual. That it was Russia is also really unusual. So Russia has a serious pirating issue. And so most books can be found free easily there, the English language books, and they don't respect the digital companies do not respect IP or international copyright laws, and so it's practically impossible to get them taken down. And so the Russian publishers are not necessarily motivated to acquire and publish English language books because they're kind of already there, unless they feel like there really is a voracious enough appeal for the actual physical translated book. Which is, a rarer and rarer thing in this day and age, as you can imagine. So, like, digital is not... so Russia is... to be published in Russia is weird on a couple of different levels, especially when your product is already out there and easily available. Which brings us to China, which has exactly the same problem. It should surprise nobody that China does not respect international copyright law or IP at all, IP, intellectual property. And so generally speaking, if China even wants to translate a book, they just will do it. They'll just steal it and the publishers will do it. So getting sold into China is very unusual. And yeah, I mean, some of you with long memories will remember this happened with the Harry Potter books, where they released in English and then they were just translated and published in China, and there were no rights transferred or anything. So that is why a lot of us authors are not officially translated into Chinese. Now, I don't know if my books are there, are available, if somebody did translate them and publish them over there. But there it is. So that's that question. And so then the next question I got is, do translators ask me questions to clarify passages? And the answer to that is I've had just the contact with two, my French translator and my Japanese translator. And what's the funniest or funnest ones that I've dealt with? I'll put a link in afterwards, but I actually have a blog post about this, which is 7 fun questions from foreign translators. So if you want to Google Gail Carriger, 7 fun questions from foreign translators, I will, you can go take a look at that. And most of them have come from my Japanese translator, because of the cultural differences between modern Japan, the linguistics difference between English and Japanese, but most of the cultural difference between modern Japan and Victorian England, some of their questions have always been very intriguing and interesting and exciting to me. And I actually found myself kind of deferring to kind of medieval Japanese history to sort of explain the class structure to the Japanese audience. And it sort of tied to that, another question I always get because I write funny stuff is whether the humor translates. And the answer is probably not all of it. So I use lots of different kinds of humor, like wordplay, rule of 3, but I also do slapstick. And one of the reasons I try to write with as much different kinds of humor as possible is because of translation. So I know, for example, that a Japanese reader base really responds more to slapstick than they do most other forms of humor in general anyway. So, and I happen to be one of those few people who likes physical comedy. And so I often will include it in my book, but partly because I am thinking about a foreign audience and a foreign readership, and also because humor is not universal. There are different kinds of humor popular in different cultures. And so I try to include in my books as many different types of humor as possible, so at least some of it will come across in translation. So that's my hope. I'm not sure. So I just don't think the books are probably as funny as they are in the original language, but that's a price you pay as a humor author, I think. It's just, you know, they're not just linguistic barriers. There are other barriers in place when you're moving between countries as a translated artifact or asset or whatever phrase you'd like to use. So then, another question here is, do I have any cases where my translators have changed in the middle of the series? Not that I'm aware of. So my French translator, Sylvie, is the same translator for all of my books that have been in French, regardless of publishing house. So my French books have all been under the umbrella of Calvin Levy, which is under the umbrella of Hachette. But the YA is a different publishing house, Livre Proche. And so, but she has been the translator for all of my works. So she is kind of intimately associated with me. Her voice, when I am in French, is the voice of me in French. It's my translator's voice. It's not really mine anymore. She has a reputation for particularly handling difficult fiction. And my stuff is difficult because it is Victorian or pseudo-Victorian, historical, and funny. And I've actually been to France a couple of times, and I've had translators come up to me, because translators often also act as interpreters at book events, and say that they love my stuff, but they would never want to translate it because it would be too difficult. So Sylvie is very respected, my French translator. I don't know. In other countries like Japan or Germany, where all of my series have been translated, or at least most of them, I don't know if I have the same translator or not. They never have told me. What's more common with my foreign translations is that the series were never completed. So the first 2 or 3 books were picked up, and then they didn't sell well enough, and so the series was just never finished translating, for which I apologize, but have little to no control. And that happened to both my Italian reader base and my Spanish reader base, and I'm so sorry for them. Especially the Italians, who got Soulless and Changeless ends on a cliffhanger, and the 3rd book is set in Italy, but they only got the first 2. I just feel so sorry for them. My Spanish books at least got the first 3. And I do feel like Blameless kind of ends as a trilogy if necessary. So, but I still feel so sorry for my readers where the books have kind of been abandoned halfway through. It must be so tough. I will say there's one other concern, which I'm going to address talking specifically about this book, which is my Russian translations, which is, yes, foreign publishers can wash. So they can whitewash and they can straight wash. And I don't know whether my publisher is gonna do it, has done it. I just don't know. And it's kind of up to somebody who has English as a second language and who reads those books to tell me. It's I don't know. The Sola series in particular gets queerer and queerer as the series progresses. So there's a part of me that wonders if Russia realized what they got themselves into. But I suppose we'll find out if they keep publishing the series. Yeah, so I do have concerns about that, but I'm not sure. But I do, or I have heard rumors of other authors who've had that happen to them. Right, so that's foreign, yeah, I know, cries and queer. That's foreign editions. Those are all of the questions that I had prepped. So now, do you have questions for me? Remember, if you're gonna ask a question, to put a question mark at the beginning. If we could do stuff pertaining to foreign editions for the next 15 minutes or so, and then I'll take any kind of random other questions at the end. I'm gonna scroll back through and see if anybody asked something that I maybe missed. But as usual, I just scan for a question mark at the beginning to see. Woo! You guys are chatty. For those of you who don't know how Facebook Lives work, waves at YouTube, I only can see like 3 comments at a time, and it just shows me all comments. I wish there were a way to just tell it to show me questions. Not that I don't love you guys, but It does make for silences while I'm searching for things. No questions so far. My hands are killing me these days because I've been... Ooh, here's someone has put a question at the beginning of their question. Do I get a copy of all the books published? No, I answered that as part of the chat. I don't get a copy of all the books published. And sometimes I don't keep a copy of all the books published. I was looking for my Swedish publication. Did I say Swedish? Yes, I did say Swedish. Because Styx did this awesome version of Solus where the pages are black. It's so cool. But I couldn't find it. I don't know where I've stored it. Generally speaking, I store them. Moving along. Is this how we ask questions? Yes. Put a question mark at the front. Do translators contact me? Yes, some of them do. Have I had feedback from native speakers? So that is a great question. Yes, the only feedback I have gotten from native speakers are my German readers. So I had a really fun kind of German meet when I was in Frankfurt, which was great. But they basically said, most of them who were the type of, you have to like take this with a grain of salt, right? The type of reader who wants to meet the author is a specific kind of reader. Excuse me. Let me get some tea. So they all spoke English extremely well, although a lot of Germans do anyway these days. But anyway, they all had read the books in English before they were translated into German, because they were the first three books were out in English before they were translated into German. So if you wanted to read them at all, you read them in English, and they did. And then some of them had also read the German translations, and they were just like, meh, they're all right. They all said that they preferred to read in English, but they were English as they all had English as a second language. So I don't know. It's really hard to get somebody who, it's kind of a question that's a non-starter, right? Because if you're so good at English that you're going to read it in the original English, then you're probably going to prefer it in the original English because you're so good at it. Does that make sense? So yeah, I don't know whether that particular reader is equipped to really judge the translation. But their attitude definitely seemed to be that you should read it in the English, that the translation was never going to be as good in German. So that was their attitude. I don't know if that's general or not. Okay, takes a sip while we're doing this. Yes, everybody, I'm not using a teacup today. I'm using my Zojirushi because I'm too lazy to put it in a teacup. I know I should, but then I have to wash the teacup. Besides, I wanted chai, and I don't have chai in the office. I only have chai at home. Has a foreign publisher ever went under and the book rights were so cheap you bought them back? So Doc, that's a very interesting question. So Doc wants to know if the publisher goes under and then you can get the rights back. That presupposes that such a thing is an option, because generally speaking, when a publisher goes into bankruptcy, that means they're in bankruptcy proceedings for whatever country they're in. And it can be years. Like, I don't even know. And so, like Spanish, for example, my Spanish publisher went under at least 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I still haven't got the rights back because things are still in a mess over there. Also, the second problem with that is you can get your rights back and then no other publisher wants to publish because the first books in the series are already published by a different publisher. It's really, really unusual for any publishers to pick up halfway through a series. And that you can kind of see why, because readers enter through the first book in that series, and if you don't own the rights to that book, you can't put it on sale. You can't produce more of it when the third one is coming out. You can't get new readers because someone else owns that asset, owns that book. And so it's just, unless it's like a huge hit, you know, like a Harry Potter book or something like that, it's just really, really unusual for a second publisher to pick up. That's another reason my Russian edition was such a shock. Although the first one had never come out. And this, what can happen is you can sell the series to a publisher for a different edition, for like a hardcover edition or a pocket edition or something. And then they have the rights to do the first book in the series. That presupposes that you're selling to a marketplace that really wants the physical copies of the book, which is not always the case now in the modern age. This is good. Like, I love it when I get questions because I'm so enmeshed in the publishing industry that I just think, oh, everybody knows this stuff, right? And of course, that's not the case. So it's good when I can explain something that really, yeah. Oh, someone is saying that the Spanish translation is really good and really accurate, which is great to know. So Doc wants to know, when French language is used in the English translation, what happens in the French translation? I don't know. I would like to think they change it to some other language just to keep the absurdity alive. But that's because I am an absurd person and I like that kind of thing. But maybe they change it back to English. That would be hilarious. But I suspect they just used the French that I used. And Doc's asking that question because I use French terms for a lot of the fashion in some of the names of, you know, Genevieve and stuff like that. And that's because that's what happened in the Victorian era. A lot of French words were carried over. The Brits hate this, but ask them about their aubergines and their courgettes sometime. There's a lot of French words in the UK and the fashion industry in particular, because fashion belongs to France, especially ladies' fashion. Do I have any thoughts on regionalization versus simply translation? For example, the Philosopher's Stone and the Sorcerer's Stone. So regionalization is when, so a direct translation is when a word is basically translated directly into another word, right? Regionalization is when the word that you're translating into, while it might technically mean the same thing, it carries with it so many connotations that you might want to pick a different word. So this can happen in foreign language translations, but it is most common in Anglicization. So the idea here is that in the United States, we use certain words that carry different meanings in the UK. Pants is a great example of that. So here we say pants for pants, the things that you wear as trousers on your lower half of your body. In the UK, you say trousers, and pants is underwear, underpants. So pants is also a swear word, which I like and have used just to confuse matters. My mother's British. I lived in England for a really long time. I slip up all the time. Anyway, so regionalization is often like not really evident unless it is something like a title. And the example, which is the Philosopher's Stone versus the Sorcerer's Stone, is an interesting one because it's such a huge deal book, and it was so noticeable for the audience at the time, the Harry Potter audience. My feeling on the matter tends to be there's a cultural underpinning to that choice, and I'm not particularly bothered by it. That said, what the Germans did to my titles was bonkers. Which kind of brings us to cover art, which I didn't get to. But so we'll get to that. But the Germans are kind of notorious for retitling books and giving a book a new title that is wildly bizarre. So for example, one of my books was called Burning Night, and it wasn't even the book, which I think is Heartless, where Alexia sets fire to London. I think it was like Blameless was called Burning Night. And I was like, really? Why Burning Night? So Germany is very interesting, actually. And part of the reason that in Germany you have lots of strange titles is because titles can be copyrighted in Germany. They cannot be copyrighted in the United States. So people can share a title in the United States. Any different books can be all published. Somebody could write I think Harry Potter is trademarked, but somebody could write The Sorcerer's Stone or The Philosopher's Stone, because you can't copyright a title. However, that's not the case in Germany. Incidentally, that is also not the case for translations. So if you, as an independent publisher or author, want to get a German translation and you hire a German in Germany to do the translation for you, they own the copyright. The translator does, not you, the original author of the content. This makes indie translations into the German language very, very tricky, very legally difficult. So just to any indie authors out there, if you would like to get yourself translated into German, I am not a legal person in any way, but I recommend hiring a German speaker in the United States or the UK, and having them do the translation and then uploading it via your United States platforms or your UK platforms, because Germany has some very weird copyright on the books, and one of the ways it comes out that readers notice is they change the titles of things all the time. So I didn't know any of that, so when my titles came out from Germany, I was like, what? Like, why? Is it because Solus doesn't exist as a word in German? No, it does. They just had to change the titles. So Germany's weird. And did a different cover. So now most of Solus, for example, got the same cover with different scripting and stuff. Most of the Finishing School books got the same cover with different scripting, different fonts, different typology, different languages for those fonts. However, that is really, really unusual. In my case, I think it had to do with the fact that steampunk is a relatively lesser known genre, and so the publishers didn't really know what to do for cover art at the time when my first book came out. I think it has to do with the fact that my original cover art, this one, while it looks dated now, was pretty unique at the time, and it won a ton of awards. So I think everybody responded really positively to this cover, and so including in other territories. That is so rare. My cover art model was independent, and so the foreign publishers could just contact her for the cover image. They didn't have to go through my publisher, my American publisher, which is unusual. She's an independent artist that they could contract. So it made it easier for foreign publishers to use my original cover. It's way more common for foreign publishers to do a different cover. So this is a photo manipulated cover for the German edition. So it's done in exactly the same way as this one, but it's obviously a different model, different everything else. And then the illustrated covers are another thing entirely. So illustrated covers are more expensive than photo manipulated covers always, and in my case they're much rarer. I only have a couple of illustrated covers. Whoop. So why are they different? In most cases, because it's difficult to get a hold of the cover, which is copyright protected, and so you have to buy the cover art as well as the rights to translate the book. So it's an added expense. It's easier for most publishers to just do their own covers in foreign languages. And also the market is different. So one of the questions that we get a lot as authors, I don't because mine are the same, but a lot of authors have different covers in the UK than in the US. And that is because it's kind of acknowledged in the industry, whether this is true or not, I don't know, that the UK palette for cover art, like what readers like, is different from the American preference for cover art. And that the UK is generally regarded as more literarily minded, so you get less genre-specific cover art in the UK. Ian Banks is a great example of this. You can kind of look at some of his covers. Some of the more popular YA authors are really interesting to look at what their cover art looks like in the UK versus the US. But So partly it's industry choice when you have different covers for different languages. Partly it's market demand. The publishers know what their audience wants, one assumes, and so they change the covers accordingly. And partly it's rights. So sometimes the cover art rights are too expensive or too much of a hassle for a foreign publisher to get a hold of. So that's why the cover art is different. That was a long answer to the regionalization question. Has Solus the manga been translated into other languages? We went through that briefly at the very beginning of the live, but yes, it exists in German as a hardback, no less. This is a hardback manga. That's Germany for you. And it exists in French. So those are its two languages. I want to say that someplace bought the rights. Maybe it was Thailand who bought the manga rights. Somebody bought, I feel like there is an Asian country that bought the manga rights but never actually did the manga, and it's not Japan, ironically. But maybe not ironically, because they have plenty of their own. Fran asks, have I ever had any short stories published in translations in foreign magazines or anthologies? Yes, so the very first short stories I wrote under a different name were for Marion Zimmer Bradley's Sword and Sorceress, and those were translated into German and French, I think. I had two. But I never saw them. And, but I did collect a very small residual check from those anthologies until very recently, I think. And that was for German sales. Apparently the Germans are still like an anthology over there. It's generally accepted that here in the US anthologies have sort of died out, at least in the genres that I would write in for print. Fran would like to know whether I have ever seen Cosplay Overseas from some of my... Yes, I have. So when I was in Hungary, I had booth girls, which I'm sure is a non-PC term now, but like back in the old days of Comic-Con, you had booth babes, quote unquote. But I had booth girls for my finishing school series, which were models who had been hired by my publisher to dress up as characters from my books, which was pretty awesome. But I also had fans come dressed up in characters. And that has happened to me in a lot of the countries that I've traveled to. So I have seen cosplay in France, England, Germany. Yeah, I think, and I've seen steampunk. Like, I've seen people come dressed in steampunk in almost every place that I've traveled to as part of, like, European tours or what have you. So, I've seen steampunk which may or may not, I didn't ask in particular whether it was one of my characters or not. But, so Italy, Spain, places like that. So, yes, I've seen costuming in most countries. So, I think cosplay... is somewhat universal these days. Reese wants to know if there's a way to get the translated books of mine. Okay, so sometimes they show up on eBay and Amazon, especially the Japanese ones. They seem to be kind of cross-global in a way that some of my other books aren't. I get excess foreign language editions. I sign them most of the time. I remember, sometimes I forget, and then I send them to Tinkered, oh, what's it called? Tinker's Marketplace. Pat Rothfuss, a fellow author, runs a place where authors can do this. They can basically offload their foreign language editions. And you can go there and buy many of mine in different languages. Whatever I have that I have sent on to them. It's called World Builders, and it's for charity. It's for Heifers International. So I mail them to him. He has a storefront and posts them all and sells them all, basically. And the proceeds go to charity. And we do a fundraiser once a year, usually in November. But I tend to just send them to him regularly. So you can always look there and see if any of my foreign language translations are up there if there's a particular one you're looking for. Sometimes you can buy them directly from the publisher, even if it's an international publisher. It just might take a while to have them shipped. I think when I posted about the Russian editions in particular, because people love the cover art so much, and like, look at that inside, isn't it gorgeous? I think a bunch of people who speak Russian and therefore can read the publisher's website went over and ordered it. And some of them in the Parasol Protectorate fan group have been reporting in that they got the books. And so you can sometimes go directly to the publisher if you want to give it a try. My Wikia, I'll go back through this live and post links and everything, but the Parasol Protectorate Wikia has a foreign languages page with links to all of the publishers that I know and have access to. So that is where you can find all of that information. Scrolling for questions. Yeah, people are sharing in the comments here on the Facebook Live about places that they've managed to get them. But most of the ones that so sometimes my publisher will send me like extra copies. Occasionally I will give away foreign languages in the Chirp. I have a couple of the Russian editions, so I might do that. The Chirp's my newsletter. But I'm trying not to have to physically mail stuff right now until after, most people have gotten vaccinated, just for not wanting to go into the post office. So eventually you can get, I may give some of them away. Amber asked if I have a blog post on the cover art awards. God, it was so long ago. It was only Soulless that ever really won recognition because it was so unique at the time. If you Google Gail Carriger Soulless wins cover art award, or awards, you might get it somewhere. My brain is so Civ-like at this juncture, everybody. I can't remember. Sorry about that. Sally asks about the cover art, which I talk about. Do I choose my own cover art? No. If I have a traditional publisher, the cover art entirely rests with them. In the past, I have had some influence over it, but most authors don't even have that. Where it is foreign covers, I have no say whatsoever. It will be entirely their choice. I don't even see the cover ahead of time. Amanda asks if cover rights have ever been bought by the author. So I probably could buy the rights from Donna. We're friends. I could probably buy the rights to this. What I have done is bought the rights to some of her other photo shoots. So if you look at my short story Meet Cute, which is about Alexia and Connell meeting each other for the first time, that's Alexia on the cover, who is Donna, who is my model, and I bought the rights to that, to make that cover from her. So yes, it's possible, but it's pretty unusual. Mostly so with the finishing school books, for example, my publisher hired the model and set up the photo shoot for this. So if I wanted the rights to the finishing school covers or to do anything with them, I would have to contact my publisher to buy those rights. And that it would be expensive and I would suspect messy, so I probably wouldn't. If I were gonna do YA or brand in such a way, I'd probably do something different with my cover art. Lavender, yes. Once upon a time, I wrote other stuff. Other name. They've all been republished. So the short stories that I was referring to as having written under another name, you can buy them. Those are the short stories that are now available from me on my website as Gail. So it's the same short stories. So Sister Song and... well, I can't remember which... oh, Fairy Debt were both under a different name originally. And now are not. And now are available under Carriger. Yay, World Builders and Pat, everybody says. Yeah, that's the best way. And you're supporting a charity if you buy the foreign editions from them. But like I said, you know, I feel like Book Depository probably has some of my foreign editions. Amazon occasionally has my foreign editions. I mean, you're going to be working with a third-party seller, so I'm not sure how reliable they are. But, you know, they're out and about, those foreign editions. June says, after seeing Bridgerton on Netflix, they were thinking about how good the Parasol Protectorate would be as a series, and I was like, wouldn't that be lovely? From your comment to Netflix's ears, huh? Although they are doing Bridgerton, so. We got a comment about the Heroine's Journey saying thank you. I thank you for reading it. I'm so grateful for anybody who's read my, this is one of those that I would love to get translated into another language. It wouldn't have a lot of the problems that fiction does with the humor translating and all that sort of a thing. But, you know, maybe at some point I will. That's the thing about when I've published a book myself and then I own the translation rights is my foreign agent always offers them. But as an individual, translation is just very, very expensive. We're talking more than an audiobook. An audiobook already costs thousands of dollars. A translation costs thousands of dollars. And that's to get a good translation, and that's because it's hard work for another person who should be paid a living wage. And therefore it's expensive. So that's one of the reasons I haven't translated a lot of my independent stuff, or any of my independent stuff, really. All right. Sign is asking about fair use. I don't know. Legally, I don't know. Sign's asking, saying that they teach and has been wondering how much of a book can you show someone for educational purposes. I think if what you're doing is holding up a book in your hand in front of a class, you can show them everything. You've bought the book, right? If you mean how much of the book can you, like, Xerox copy and pass out and all sorts of that sort of thing, it gets very messy. Books that are for educational purposes and nonfiction books are slightly different from fiction books. Distribution and cost is different. Legally speaking, the most common rule of thumb in the United States, and again, not a lawyer, is 10%. So 10% fair use, parody, sample, all those sorts of things tend to be about 10%. Any more than that and you're edging into copyright. So, but I have no idea how it works in the educational system. But fair use is already legally shaky ground. But that copyright fair use is the term you want to Google and look into, because that's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with education. It's called fair use. And that basically is like how, in a strange way, like how much of any piece of art is the world's. Like how much of something that you have produced or I have produced, because I have produced it and put it out into the world, how much of it does actually belong to the world? That is like one of the great questions of our time in these days of like digitalization and digital freedom and copyrighted information and stuff like that. And it is a complicated question, and education and, you know, wanting people to be educated and wanting your work or my work, especially something like this, to get into the educated world is one of the eternal quandaries that all writers face. Like, how much do I just want the thing to be consumed and to make people's lives better, and how much do I need to make a living off of that thing because it is my living? And where does the right to access information stop? And how does it cross into my right to survive as an artist? Like, that's the great quandary of the modern age, I would say, from an artist's point of view. You know, because the flaw in this, of course, is that if you don't pay me for what I have created, then I have no incentive to continue creating, right? And I really don't, personally, because, you know, I have to go back to being an archaeologist. Woohoo! Fran asks about my foreign convention travel experiences, Frankfurt Festival, for those who miss conventions. Oh, so we're getting on to the end, so no more questions, please. I'll try and get through the last of these. Frankfurt Book Fair or Book Expo is a lot more like BEA used to be, so it is not a fan-facing convention. Bologna Book Fair is similar. So Bologna is for children's literature mostly, although they're ever evolving, and who knows what it's going to be like after COVID. But so there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that goes on. Author appearances are actually relatively rare. It's mostly just for foreign agents and publishers to meet each other and glad hand and talk about. It's a lot more like a traditional sales conference kind of a convention. I happen to be at Frankfurt, and so I organized to meet my fans, but that was just at a pub nearby. I found an English pub in Frankfurt, and I was like, if anybody wants to come meet me in person, I happen to be in Germany, this is your chance. I've done that a couple of times when I've traveled for like non-fan facing stuff, because I like you guys and I'd like to hang out with you if I'm somewhere else for some other reason. Frankfurt was very interesting. It's literally like a kind of like trade show floor, and then there's like little rooms where you kind of meet up face to face with foreign publishers who you might be pitching to. So I was there with my foreign agent, my lit agent, and there would be me, and so we would have these kind of meetings, and sometimes those meetings were with foreign publishers who were already publishing me, and sometimes they were with ones that I was trying to get to acquire me. So it's a little weird and awkward. I'm okay with that kind of thing. And then there are kind of cocktails and meet and greets, and sometimes your US publisher puts them on. My friend Peter Brett can probably speak to this more eloquently than I can, because he's done a lot. As a US author, he does it very, very well in Europe, and so he's done a lot more European stuff than I have. But each one is different. But these kinds of conventions that a U.S. author goes to in Europe in particular tend to be more like a kind of business trade show than they are like a Worldcon or a World Fantasy, like a fan-run fan convention. For me, anyway. I have also been to those, and they're from a con goer from the United States, they're always slightly different. So, Nine Worlds is different. That's in the UK. And then I've done Epinal, which is a French fan convention. It's kind of the big fantasy convention that they do. And it's kind of combined with kind of an SCA experience there. So there's lots of historical costuming going on. So yeah, I think it's awesome. You should always take it, like, the opportunity to visit a fan-run convention if you are local to, you happen to be in a foreign country where they're having one, because they're so different. I did Saint Malo in France too. That again is a little bit more like kind of a BEA or a librarian convention, where it's all about like selling the books and being with the books and kind of meeting your fans who are part of the industry. So meeting French, other French authors, but also like French librarians and stuff. So they're kind of different sorts of cons in different places, obviously. Different cultures and all that. Reese wants to know if I've ever gotten requests for cover art or pieces of a book being used as part of a tattoo. Yes! In fact, there may or may not be a certain person watching this live right now who has a tattoo that is partly based on a piece of art that I commissioned. In that particular instance, I commissioned it, and so I owned the rights to it, so it was absolutely fine with me. A couple of people have takes on the Solus as tattoos. A couple of people have takes on the octopus on the spine, which is here, as tattoos. So yeah, mostly I personally haven't been asked. I think people just do it if they like it, and I think everybody's kind of fine with that. Copyright infringement and trademark infringement happens when somebody starts to earn money off of a thing that is the intellectual property of somebody else. So if you're putting it on your body or cosplaying or doing it for fun or just being creative, there's no real infringement because you're not selling it. And that's kind of just where the distinction is. If you want to look up kind of how that falls in, how tattooing, I don't talk about it, but I do talk about cosplay, which is a little bit similar. I mean, it's nice to ask the author, but I think most authors would be probably slightly confused. But I have a blog post about like the complexities of fan fiction, fan make, which is like when you're creating an object that's influenced by a book, and like the point at which you start selling that kind of thing on Etsy, and you know how I personally feel about it and kind of how authors relate to it, who are like me, who have a lot of it happen, and cosplay and stuff. And you can just look up Gail Carriger fanfic, fan make, something like that. Again, it's one of those I'll link once I'm done with this. But I would say tattooing kind of falls into the kind of permanent cosplay arena. Jessa asked if I've ever tried a new food or for story research, and did I end up with a new food that I loved? You can Google Gail Carriger Victorian meal. I cooked a full 7-course Victorian meal at one point, just to see what it was like to cook that much, eat that much, but also to sample some Victorian recipes. And I had some interesting side effects, and I certainly learned a lot about Victorian cooking from that experience. So yes, and one of the things I cooked were Victorian apple fritters in a beer batter. I think we may have made a wine batter, but whatever it was. And those were delicious, and they are a great dessert, and I highly recommend them. And yeah, I don't cook desserts for myself very often because I like them too much. But those are one of those things that entered the rotation of my life at that juncture. But generally speaking, it works the other direction. I tend to write about places after I visited them. So I already have experienced like the food and stuff like that. So a very broad example is when I was in Singapore, I fell in deep love, and I'm still in deep love with the concept of hawker centers. And to me, it is one of the perfect executions of cuisine. It's kind of the idea of a cafeteria style, but it's like all of these different cuisines catering to all sorts of different palates. And because I am a person who likes to eat lots of different things and try different things, like the hawker center is my happy place. And so I dictated that the Tinkered Star universe, like most people when they go into space, eat at hawker centers. I just decided that this was a thing. Like the hawker center is the thing that future humans all do, if they're future humans like me, I guess. So there's a random thing. My Tinkered Stars universe is full of hawker centers. My future. I'm more likely to use a food that I've already eaten and enjoyed and put that into a book, or a version of it into a book. Often when I'm writing the Parasolverse stuff, I have to back fact check to make sure that the Victorians had that food, or that time period had that food, because sometimes they didn't. Lavender is asking whether I generally attend Worldcons, and says that they're trying to get to 2022 in Chicago. I didn't even know 2022 was in Chicago. I will try so hard to go to that Worldcon. I love Chicago. Yes. Oh my God, that's great. Sorry, that's very exciting. Yes, I do. I try to attend either Worldcon or World Fantasy every year. And that is because those are my original author homes. So, my original fangirl convention home is a smaller con here called BayCon in the Bay Area. But the first conventions I really attended as a professional author were Worldcon and World Fantasy, and so I have great kind of residual loyalty to them. And they are still one of the places where there are a bunch of my author friends that I don't get to see, and editor friends, and you know, people in the industry that I don't get to see any other way unless I go to one or both of those. So I at least try to get to one of them. And Chicago, now that I know, is definitely going to be on the list. All right, Frankie admitted that they're the one with the tattoo, so I didn't want to out you, Frankie, if you didn't want people to know. But it's an awesome tattoo. Boop, 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 boop. All right, well, I think we're gonna wrap things up soon. I'm just scanning to see if there were any last questions, and it doesn't look like there are. So we basically just talked about foreign language editions and foreign conventions and all things overseas for me anyway. But so yeah, I'm glad you all tuned in for it, and I hope you learned something or enjoyed it. And I hope you tell me if you've read my books in another language and how you felt about that translation. I saw a few in the comments, but I'd love to know more because as I started out with, I myself have never read my books in another language, so I have no idea what it's like. But hopefully you understand a little bit more about how complicated it is and why things have fallen out in other languages the way that they have. And yeah, and I have and consistently do look into translating things like my novellas. So, you know, I haven't ruled it completely out. So just so you know, I'm always thinking about foreign languages and whether I should put my stuff into foreign languages. So happy Valentine's Day to those of you who celebrate it or not. Happy, when I was a single girl, and I like being a single girl, so, you know, I would just drink champagne on Valentine's Day. Champagne and chocolates. It's never a bad idea. Or a fizzy drink and chocolates, or tea and chocolates. So, or tea and a sweet thing if you're not into chocolate, or tea and a savory thing if you're not into chocolate. But celebrate however you would like. I love you. And I hope you have a wonderful month. I will probably not be doing a live next month. I'm so sorry. I will be in a place with very little internet. Hopefully typing away like a good little author beast. Bye, everybody.